Charter for Compassion Global Read. We're here today with Ben Mikaelsen, award-winning author of several books. We're going to be talking about Touching Spirit Bear today, but he's written several. His newest one, Jungle of Bones. If you haven't caught that one, make sure you grab that. I'd also like to direct you to a couple of things. At the bottom of your window, there's a chat box. If you'd like to pose any questions for Ben later on in the webinar, that would be great. And please visit our Charter's website at charterforcompassion.org. We have lots of upcoming webinars. We have an educational institute that offers a lot of different courses and workshops, so check that out. If you haven't signed the Charter and you feel so inclined, please do that as well. All those links are there. And we're excited to have you. Happy Earth Month. In 11 days, we'll be celebrating Earth Day, so happy Earth Day in advance. We just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Golden Rule Day on April 5th. There's lots of different 24-hour broadcasts of that. There's a link on the Charter's website if you want to take a look at that as well. So without any further ado, I'm so honored and happy to have you here with us today, Ben. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be here with us and to share some insights into your book, Touching Spirit Bear, which has, is near and dear to my heart. I've shared that with my students on several occasions, and I just love how you write, and you're even a more wonderful human being. If you haven't met Ben yet, you'll figure that out real fast. So welcome, Ben. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
So tell us how you got the, insight into writing this book. How did you go about writing it? What motivated you to get this book in the hands of all of us?
I'm going to start off by saying this. The one thing that maybe I do a little different than most writers look for ideas. I've never been a big one that way. I've looked for emotions. If I take a book, a really good novel, and I read it, I don't sit there at the end and close my eyes and say, oh, that was the most wonderful book because every word was spelled right. It's because it had emotions. And so if I find something that grips my heart, I can't let it go because of the strong emotions, then I'll tend to hold on to that and try to wrap a story around it. And most of my books, if you ask me, where did you come up with the idea? I could real easily in 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences tell you. Touching Spirit Bear was a little bit different, actually quite a bit different. It was like gas seeping into a room, and it was so insidious, the experiences and the motivations, that I didn't see them coming. But then there's that moment when a spark sets off an explosion that changes the future. That's how Touching Spirit Bear was. I had raised a black bear called Buffy, and he was a little research bear. I have to add that at this point, I'm very much against people raising wild animals. They belong in the wild. But this was a little research bear. He had his front claws taken out and was going to be destroyed. And so I adopted him and committed my life for 27 years to raising him. And I'll show you a couple pictures later on of my bear Buffy. But I noticed with Buffy that if I ever went in the pen with him and and he came out of the pen, he spent a lot of time in the house, and probably 6, 7 hours we'd spend walking each day. And if I was silly, he was silly. And if I was very gentle, he was very gentle. If I played rough, he could play really rough. But if I ever was angry, I noticed those were the days when he'd get cranky, and I'd be a little bit careful. And so I saw that how I treat not just a bear, but how I treat the world is how it treats me. And if I have a bad day, the best place to go and look for the reason is in the mirror. And so I knew that segment, okay, or that ingredient. I'd been in a lot of schools, and I'd seen a lot of anger in kids, and I'd had my own past growing up in South America as a bilingual child in a society where my skin was different than other kids and being teased, and then to know what it was like to come to the United States as a high schooler, and all of a sudden I fit in with skin color in Minnesota, but everything else about me was different. So I knew that ostracization, what it felt like to be so angry as a teenager. I had a friend that was a prosecuting attorney in Minnesota, and he got involved in circle justice. It has a lot of different names on the internet. It's sometimes called restorative justice, youth intervention, peer mediation. There's a lot of different names for it, but it all boils down to the process of dealing with delinquent behavior through healing instead of through punishment. And so I had this friend of mine introduce me to that, and there was all these ingredients. They were seeping into my room, but I never put them all together until one day I woke up, and it was like every other morning, getting my coffee going and turning the TV on, and then the first words I heard were this morning in Littleton, Colorado, at a high school called Columbine. And that was the morning that I decided, okay, that was the impetus. I need to write a story that deals with circle justice, with healing, with the circle of life, the whole process. I had read another book too, and I'm making this a little bit of a long answer, but it's important. I'd read a book called Lord Grizzly, Hugh Glass's Crawl to Survival. And it was an incredible survival book. It wasn't numb fingers around a campfire. It was forgiveness of the heart. And here's a man that was left to die by his regiment, and he crawled on his hands and knees 300 miles. And what was so neat about that book was his anger kept him going and through this rugged ordeal. But when he finally got this fort in sight where he knew that he had made it over this 300-mile crawl on his hands and knees, he forgave the people that had abandoned him. And that was the neat part about it. And I wanted to write a survival story, not that it had the ingredients of finding food and staying warm and all these things, but it had so much more. It had the healing of the soul. And so I think when Columbine happened, that was the day that I decided, okay, I need to write something along this line. And it's been quite a journey with this book. Richard Peck told me once that if I was lucky in my career, I'd have one or two of my novels that became bigger than me. And I asked him, I said, how will I know when that happens? And he smiled. He said, well, when they become bigger than you. This book has become bigger than me. Every day, I mean, Saskatchewan now has purchased the state, has purchased, I think, 500 class sets of the novel for every middle school in the province. Connecticut now has, if any adult in the prison system there reads Touching Spirit Bear, they get 2 more hours in the yard. But then there's the emails that I get every day that show that it's touched a heart here, a heart there. And those are to me, those are the big payoffs. But anyway, that was a long answer to your question.
Well, that's great. You mentioned restorative justice, and the Charter for Compassion actually has one of their sectors is devoted specifically to that. We have like a bunch of different sectors, and so that's really neat that that's an integral part of this book. And one of the things that I pulled out when I was teaching or sharing this book with my kids and reading it to them, and just was just all the different themes that ran in and out of that book. Certainly healing and forgiveness and anger and trust and survival, compassion for sure, those, where did all of those come from? Was it, again, sort of referring back to this whole Columbine incident, and then your personal history, and how did you develop these characters, and where did you get these really cool stories that when Edwin and Garvey were with Cole, the main character, some of like the native sort of myths or learning lessons. Can you talk about how you got that information? Or?
Yeah, I think what you're asking me is, where do the sensitivities come from? That's another going to be another 3-minute answer. I've always, I think because I was a loner growing up, I've spent a lot of time by myself. I used to go up to Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota for a whole month into the woods by myself, and I'd hitchhike cross country by myself. And I spent a lot of time writing because it was a way of capturing my emotions without showing it to anybody. And so I think that side of me, I always tell people that Touching Spirit Bear is it's a fictional story using a real process called circle justice or restorative justice. But the characters I call it my own emotional autobiography. There's 4 characters in Touching Spirit Bear. There's the young boy that is brain damaged in a high school fight where he gets jumped by the high school bully. There's Cole Matthews, who is the high school bully. There's Garvey, who is the juvenile detention parole officer. And then there's Edwin, who's a wise old sage elder up in the Tlingit tribe. And those are the 4 people there. And I see myself in each one of them. There was a time when I was the oppressed, the kid that was being picked on, being beat up. I didn't have to imagine anything to write his perspective or point of view. And then there was Cole Matthews. And when I came to the United States as a very, very angry young teenager, again, except for dredging up the feelings and the uncomfortableness of that, I didn't have to imagine anything to write down Cole Matthews' feelings. But then I remember a period of my life where it was like an awakening. It was like one day I woke up and I thought, the world is a wonderful, wonderful place if I recognize it, and if I quit holding a chip on my shoulder, and then I started discovering how beautiful the world can be, and it had to do with my own perspective. The world hadn't changed at all, and then I like to think I became Garvey, and it was starting to become important in my life now to help the world and to do things beyond myself. Edwin, I don't know if I've become him yet. He's a wise old man, and I'm neither wise nor old. But maybe if I keep learning, maybe if I keep those sensitivities developing, and maybe someday if I live long enough, maybe I'll be an Edwin. But I always call that book my emotional autobiography. So, but I think some of those are the things. I think that's one of the reasons I love your organization. The compassion that we have and that we exhibit is not a one-way street. I've thought about this before we even started this morning. It's not a one-way street at all. In fact, I was just talking to kids on Skype yesterday, and they were asking about this whole process of circle justice. And I said, one of the greatest discoveries in the world is when you realize that you're part of a circle, that what you do to one part of the circle affects the whole circle. And I said, you cannot do anything. Once you realize you're part of the circle of life, you can't do anything without realizing that it comes back to you tenfold. If you walk up to somebody and you're mean, your meanness affects them and wrecks 2 minutes of their day, but it's wrecking your life because it's making you a mean person. And I said, if you come up and you show kindness or compassion to somebody, that's sweet. that's sweet. It's nice for the person that you've been compassionate to and kind to. It makes their day a little bit better. But you know what the big payoff is? You became a kinder, more compassionate person in the big picture. And once you start realizing that what goes out comes back tenfold, that was huge for me. That was just huge for me. And so those are some of the things that I think allowed that book to become what it became and made me who I am now. But it isn't this whole thing an ongoing process?
Absolutely. And you bring up the circle, and there's, it starts out with circle justice. The book starts out talking about that, but there's that theme. That was another theme that I didn't mention earlier. The circle is throughout, and also you mentioned, the beauty that you as an individual have seen. Like you said, it was always there, that part of, the earth and coal being, sort of cognizant of it all of a sudden, that, it was just, the world just existed before, but he didn't really take notice of it. And that was just, I think, really powerful message. So thanks for bringing that up. Also, if you could, I know that you and I have shared this conversation, but you did some research with the book, right? You were going to go to this place where you could see spirit bears and things like that. And did you have a guide, or how did you fit some of this?
What I did was Prince Royal Island up in British Columbia is the primary location for spirit bears. And for those of you that may perhaps not know this, a spirit bear is actually a black bear, species black bear. They're not albino. In fact, I'll soon show you a picture of the spirit bear, but that approached me. But they're a recessive genetic gene. They have black eyes, black nose, just like a regular black bear, but they have a recessive genetic gene that's white. And so I went up to do my research. There is a couple people that have been working with trying to preserve the spirit bear up in that area. And there's the native tribes that exist up there. This is a spirit bear with its little cub, and you can see maybe 200 of these little bears exist, and they've outlawed the hunting of these cubs, okay, or these bears, the white spirit bear. But what they haven't done, and this is the point of contention, is they haven't outlawed the hunting of the black bear up there. Well, they're the only bears on the planet that carry that recessive genetic gene that allows the white spirit bear, that has become a big tourist draw and profit for the local tribe. And so they're starting to realize that if they allow the destruction of the black bear, they're in essence destroying the white black bear. And so it's turning things around. But when I went up there, there's some people say that spirit bears, they call them kermodes, okay? They say they don't exist. They say they're folklore, they're fantasy. It's like Bigfoot or like Loch Ness Monster. On Princess Royal Island, there's people who have lived on that island their whole lives, never have seen a spirit bear. When I went up there to do my research, there's a Japanese film crew that had been up there for almost a month with a helicopter and had never seen one. So I guess realistically, I knew I would never see a spirit bear, but I went up there to do my research. It was late September, and I've had survival courses, and I like to write from experience. And so it's a survival story. And so I jumped into the surf about a mile offshore, late September, in my underpants. And TMI, I know, TMI. And I swam to shore, and I did everything I possibly could to try to start a fire and to stay warm. And after 3.5 hours, I finally had to give up because I was starting to get sluggish and slur my words. And they came ashore from the sailboat with hot chocolate and blankets. But then I changed the story to make it realistic for a young boy from the city to try to survive on this island. And the second day, this shows my age, okay, because it was before digital photography. But the second day I was on the shoreline, and it was near dusk, and it was hazy out, and out of the mist came this magnificent white spirit bear. He had salmon blood on his paws, and he came down towards the shoreline, towards me, and all I had was my old Kodak camera, and I took this one picture of him, and he came down, picked up a big salmon on the shore about 20 feet away from me, and he turned and he looked right at me. There were two of us on the shoreline, and the other gentleman looked at me and he said, "Ben, that bear looked right at you before it went back into the woods." And I said, "Well, of course, because I have a novel to write." But that was the real spirit bear that I got to experience myself, and it was one of those magical moments in my life. But I did a lot of this research in real life, and I think I understood. I was traveling up in British Columbia near Prince Rupert at the time, and I ran across a Native gentleman, a First Nation man. His name was Richard, and he asked me what I was doing up there, and I told him I was up looking to explore circle justice and find out about circle justice. And he smiled. He said, "So, what have you found out?" I said, "Well, I haven't really discovered anything yet. I'm just on my way up to, interview people and talk." And I said, "What do you do for a living?" He smiled. He said, "Well, I'm a Haida spiritual leader. That's what I do, is I work with troubled teenagers." And I said, "Really? Really?" I said, "So tell me about circle justice." And I started peppering him with questions, and he smiled. He looked at me. He goes, No. He said, "I could describe it with my mouth to your brain." He said, "But you come with me. Come with me." And he said, "Then you'll discover it with your heart." And so I made a few phone calls and canceled, and I traveled with him. And we went out and we soaked the ponds, and we carried their ancestor rocks. And at the end of the week, I think I understood circle justice up here, but I didn't understand it here yet. And the last day that I was on this little island, there were two teenage boys. They were 8th grade boys that got in a bad fight, and they were really going after each other. They weren't trying to hurt each other. They were trying to kill each other. And Richard, this Haida spiritual leader, he was a big man, and he walks over and he picks the two boys up and he holds them up and he says, "Who began this fight?" And they're swearing at each other and trying to punch each other. And he said, "Stop. Who began this fight?" And one said, "Well, he called my mother a such and such." And he said, so did you throw the first punch?" And the kid says, "Yeah. So what are you going to do?" And he let the other boy loose. He says, "You're going to hit me?" And he says, "No, I'm going to do something that's probably going to hurt a lot worse." And he hugged him, and he just hugged him and hugged him. And to begin with, the boy was squirming and calling him all kinds of homophobic names and everything else. And the other boy that had been released, was behind the spiritual leader, and he was going and like this. And it was, but finally the boy that was being hugged, he realized he wasn't going anywhere soon. And so he relaxed, and the Haida spiritual leader, big teddy bear of a man, he hugged him in closer and closer. Now the interesting thing happened. The other boy who had been released started getting a puzzled look on his face. And then he says, "Hey, how come, if he's the one that started the fight and threw the first punch, then how come you're hugging him?" Richard turned to him and he said, "It's because he needs the most love." And that was the moment that I understood it here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's that's what compassion's all about, right? And it's great. That's just beautiful story. I got the goosebumps.
But that was the moment that I understood it in my heart, and that was the moment that I thought, okay, now I can go home and write a book. You know?
Yeah. Was Richard the one who did he share those actual stories about the stick and breaking the anger off and
Yeah, that was a funny one too.
the hot dog one? I know I don't want to give
Yeah.
too much, but it
Well,
was
the hot dog one came out of my own mind. I had at a garage sale somewhere. I picked up a little hot dog cookbook, and so that came out of that idea. But Richard, we'd go down and we'd soak in the pond, and he was funny. He hands me, he didn't mean this racist at all. And so that's not why I tell this story. It was because it was humorous. But he hands me this stick and he says, I said, how do you get rid of anger? Because I said, that's something I've always fought my whole life, trying to get rid of anger. I said and he hands me this stick and he says, well, the left is your anger. The right is your happiness. Get rid of the anger. Go ahead, break it off. And I broke the end off and I handed it back. And he said, Ben, the right is your happiness. The left is your anger. The anger's still there. So here, break it off. And I broke it again and handed it back. And he said, no, Ben, the right is your happiness. The left is your anger. Break off the anger. Get rid of it. I said, well, the left side will always be there. And he says, you're pretty smart for a white man. He said, most of them hand it back 3 times before they say that. And I laughed about that. That was, he didn't racist at all, but he is cute. You're pretty smart for a white man. But no, a lot of those ideas in the book came straight from experiences and my time with Richard. And it was good. It was some good stuff.
So would you tell us a little bit about, you said that, touching spirit bear is bigger than you, it's gone beyond you. Can you give us some examples of I know you said about the 500, schools that are having classroom copies, and was it Saskatchewan?
Yes, Saskatchewan, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the big stories. The tsunamis are the little teeny ding ding email that you get in the middle of the night. And I get up and I go out and I punch and see. There was a story. There was a mother in Wyoming whose daughter had cancer, terminal cancer, and so her and the parents were just obsessed with caring for their daughter. And one weekend, they realized that just as a couple, they needed a mental health weekend. So they left their daughter with their Uncle Fred, and they went to the local Holiday Inn and checked in. And one of the teachers at school had given her this novel, Touching Spirit Bear, and said, you need to read this. And so just sitting around this Holiday Inn swimming pool on the weekend, same town where they lived, she began reading that book. And by Sunday morning, she had just finished reading that book, and they were packing their things up, getting ready to go back home and pick up their daughter. And the sheriff showed up, and it turns out that their daughter had been accosted and raped by their uncle. And the mother writes to me about this, and she says, nothing in life has prepared me for this event. She said, I don't know right now what to do with my daughter's, dealing with cancer. And now this. And so she says, all I want to do is curl up in a fetal position and I want to cry. And she says, but I can't do that because my daughter needs me. And she says, but I also don't have any words of wisdom to make it all better. I can't make this all better. And so she was very honest with her daughter. She said, honey, she said, I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say. And the daughter was actually more mature about it than the mother. She says, Mom, we already know that life's not always fair. We already know that with my cancer. And she said, this isn't good what happened. And the mother said, let's do something. there's a book I just finished reading. Let's sit down and I'll stay home from school tomorrow and let's read this book. And so they sat and read the book. And at the end, the mother says, now, how do you feel? And the daughter says, you know, Mom, I'm still really angry. She said, there was a lot of stuff in that book. Can you stay home and let's read it one more time tomorrow? And so they stayed home and together they read it out loud, holding hands. And at the end of the second day, they set the book down, Touching Spirit Bear, and mother said, now, how do you feel? And the daughter says, you know, Mom, like I said, life isn't fair. Things happen. But she says, I'm going to be all right. I am going to be in the big picture. I'm going to be all right. But she said, I can only be all right if I do something. And there's something I need to do, but you need to help me. And the mother said, what is it, honey? And she says, I have enough money saved up. She said, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy another copy of Touching Spirit Bear, but I need you to come with me. Will you go into the jail and give it to Uncle Fred with me?
Oh,
and those are the, and I don't get just a few of those stories. I get a lot of those. And those are the ones that to me grab my heart and make me realize that this journey that we're on is so much bigger than us.
yeah. Wow, that's a touching, powerful reach out for sure.
Yeah.
How has the story impacted like the people of the First Nations? How's their response been to the book?
It's been really, really good. Really good. When I do my research, I really, really try to be sensitive to the emotions of people I represent, and you're always going to, you know, the fact that I'm not a First Nation person, and I'm writing a First Nation story with a young boy that's First Nation. That's always going to be a little bit of a lightning rod for criticism. But I've gone to, people like up in Juneau, Alaska, there's a gentleman at the university there that teaches, one of the last teachers of the Tlingit language and the original language. And his father was one of the last chiefs, his grandfather, excuse me. And I gave him Touching Spirit Bear, and I said, I'm not going to say one word. I just want you to read this, and I want you to write me every emotion and thought that you have. Is there inaccuracies, accuracies, you know, things that are realistic, non-realistic? You tell me. But from your perspective as being so immersed in Tlingit culture. And he wrote back to me and he said, this is phenomenal. He said, I checked with my grandmother, and he said to verify some of the things that you have there. He says, you're right on. He said he had a couple little linguistic things, but it was nothing. He confirmed that I had done my homework. Now, that said, there's been some criticism. And ironically, this is the interesting thing. The criticism has come from the things that Cole does, the ancestor rocks, soaking in the ponds, and I've had a couple Native American people write to me and say that's not part of the Tlingit culture or the Haida culture. It's not part of Native American culture, and you represent it as, you know, kind of a cultural thing. And I thought about it, and I reread the book, actually, that part of it, and I says, no, I really didn't say it was part of the Tlingit culture. I just represented it as a methodry that is being used by that particular parole officer who happened to be Tlingit, which was very, very true, because in real life, this Richard that worked with juvenile delinquents up there, he happened to be Haida, but these methods were not something that were culturally handed down to him. They were just methods that he had come up with that for working with the troubled teenagers. And so the irony of it is it was almost like he was handcuffed the same as they were handcuffing me with criticism. It was like, if he's Haida, then he can't come up with independent brilliance, you know? And no, no different than, I can. And so this whole thing of, cultural bias and racism, I sometimes had to just erase that out of my mind and just make sure that when I write, every sentence, every word just comes through this little purifier I have called a heart.
Yeah, and it definitely does, Ben. Thank you for those insights. And I just wanted to just take a quick little pause. That we have some guests with us, and some of them just joined us not at the very beginning when I mentioned about the chat box on the lower part of your screen. If you wanted to click into that, it's a really great place for you to type in questions that you might have for Ben. We welcome those at this point. And while we're waiting for those, Ben, did you want to talk a little bit about what took place in Sitka?
Oh, yeah, this was so neat. I travel a lot as an author all over the United States, Canada, and other countries, speaking in schools, and I'd been up to Sitka a number of times. It's the most incredible little town up in Alaska, out western and this southeast Alaska, and it's a beautiful area with a lot of the Russian influence still in the town. And I'd been up there in the schools, and they decided the village, the town of Sitka, first off, has the premier totem maker in probably all of Alaska that lives there. And so the city decided that they were going to raise the money, and they were going to create one of the largest totems that this man has ever made. And so they looked around and they found the beautiful big Sitka spruce, and they went to every tribe and clan in the area, and they said, this is going to be a community totem. So we'll have all of our symbols, not just the crow, not just the eagle or just the bear, but each one will put whatever symbols you want in your 6 feet of the totem. And this is going to be a community totem. And they went to the kids of Sitka. Probably 90% of all of the children in Sitka are First Nation or Native American. And they told them, because you're the future of our nations and our tribes and clans, we're going to give you the bottom 6 feet. You're the foundation of the future, and you decide what symbols you want there. Well, because I've been up there a number of times, and they use touching spirit bear very widely in all the schools. I swear every kid in Sitka has read touching spirit bear multiple times. They came back and they'd taken a vote through all the schools, so that wasn't an idea that was pushed on any single person. And they said, we want Cole Matthews and we want the circle of life. And the elders were in a predicament, because they said, we can have the circle of life. We can represent that with symbolism. But Cole Matthews is Anglo. He's a white man. And this is a Native American, this is a First Nation totem. And so you pick something else, but you have the circle of life, but then you pick something not Cole Matthews. So they came back 2 weeks later, and they'd taken a vote in all the schools. And the kids said, no, we want Cole Matthews in the circle of life. They said, no, you can't have Cole Matthews because he's not Native American. He's Anglo. So pick something else. We need this in 4 days. So we're going to come back, and you have whatever you want. So they came back in 4 days, and the kids had all voted. And they said, we've decided we want to leave our 6 feet of the totem blank, nothing on it. They said, why is that? They said, well, because you've asked us twice already what we want. We've told you, and you won't listen to us. So that means the future of our nations have no voice. And so we want to leave our 6 feet blank. The elders threw their hands up. They says, no, we can't have that either. So they kind of came to a compromise. They kind of nativized Cole Matthews. But if you have that picture there of him, this is actually Cole Matthews in the circle of life. And when they had me come up for the dedication of the totem, it was it was quite a day. But let's see if we have the bigger picture of the totem. It was quite the totem. And to this day, you can go up there in the state park north of town. And if you walk the shoreline down, you'll find the totem. And that's still only maybe a third of the totem, but that's Cole Matthews and the Circle of Life. There we go. I'm sure glad somebody else is running this computer, not me. I'd have us so lost.
I'm struggling a little bit myself. Is the picture back off again?
Yeah, now you're on.
Okay, great. Thanks for that story as well. There is one question here. Let me see if I can find it again. A question, this person hasn't finished the book yet, but thank you, Lillian, for writing in. She said, I haven't finished the book, but I think I remember it was Cole's right arm was injured permanently. She says, I had the feeling choosing the right arm was particularly symbolic. Was that your intention?
No, it wasn't. All I did was I had it be his right arm because it's his I thought to myself, if I was to get injured, it'd be the most critical. If my right arm, I'm right-handed, so my right arm would be the most critical. But sometimes people read into a story symbolism and plot and characterizations and stuff. They read in and they'll do sometimes really, really in-depth analysis of my story. And I'll come to the school to visit the school, and they'll say, okay, here's all the different symbols Mr. Mikaelsen had, and here's all of the things that we think they meant. And they, oh my goodness, they've done this incredible analysis. And they say, were we correct about your symbolism? I said, I just wrote a good story. I wasn't thinking that deep.
I know I was probably guilty of that too. Just the whole just being so into nature and things like that. For me, it was, just the description. I mean, not just when he was on the island, but even just, when he was, having his inner struggles and just the depth of emotion that came through, and then the description. You were right there. I was right there all the time, so it was really, really beautiful. There's so many things that overlap in life and in our careers, and the people I've met like you and things on these webinars, and there's so many of those things that overlap, and the people I've met in the process. I was down, Columbine no longer gives tours because they had Japanese tour buses coming through town to see where the massacre had taken place and all this, and they stopped it and they said no more tours, not for anybody, anytime, anywhere, anyhow. But the principal, I was speaking at a school 3 miles away from Columbine, and the principal, they used touching spirit bear at Columbine, fairly heavy. And he heard that I was in town, and he said, I'm going to make an exception for this because you wrote this novel because of Columbine. And so he invited me over, and he himself personally gave me a tour, and it was sobering. It was absolutely sobering to see what can come when kids can get angry. And I've noticed when I'm in schools that kids emulate. They need guidance. They pattern whatever's in front of them. And if what they see is cage fighting, they're going to cage fight. If what they see is hitting each other in the face or being aggressive and angry or being indifferent to each other, they're going to go home and they're going to be indifferent and they're going to do that. But if what they see modeled is kindness, compassion, they will turn around and they will exhibit kindness and compassion. And once I started realizing that at the formative level of kids, how important it is that they have these models to emulate, that's when I started realizing that if I can
be part of that in any way, it's worth the effort. Because I see kids. I had another cute story. I went to a school last year where there was a teacher. A lot of times when I show up at a school, they'll have a reception by the teachers for me in the morning before they start their classes, and they'll have donuts and cheap orange juice, and and they stand around and so I was in the library, and almost all the teachers had left to go to their classes, and this one teacher comes walking across the library, very stoic face, like she's holding herself together. And then she gets about 30 feet away from me, and she just bursts out in tears, and she comes running up to me and hugging me. And I said, well, hey, this is cool. I like hugs, but is there a reason? And she finally gathered herself together, and she says, we have one of our boys that is just not making it. He was on his way to the juvie center, and she said, our luck with that hasn't been very good. They just seem to get worse and worse once we give up on him here. And so she said, I argued for him to be left here one more month to see if we could get through his head. And she said, during that month, I decided we're going to read Touching Spirit Bear. And she said every day, she said, you could tell exactly what we read in the book because of his attitude. And at the very beginning of the book, he'd walk out like a tough kid afterward. He'd say, yeah, somebody ought to kick Cole's butt because he deserves it, and I'd be the one to do it, But then later on, when there was a storm, and all of a sudden there's the sparrows that fall, and Cole Matthew, this tough kid, he walks out and he goes, yeah, it's about time he starts thinking about something more than just himself. And he started losing his toughness. And at the very, very end, when they finished the book, she said, the kid hung around, and after all the other kids left, she said, so what'd you think of the book? And he says, yeah, there's some good stuff in there, but I need to change, but it's too late. And the teacher asked him, why do you say it's too late? He said, well, yeah, I burned all my bridges. There's nobody. See, and she says, how do you know you're changed? And he says, it's just a feeling. It's a feeling I got, but I never had that feeling before, so I know it's real. But he says, it's too late now. I'm screwed. And she goes, listen. She says, I'll tell you what. Are you lying to me? He goes, no. She said, then if you're not, I'll be the first person to trust you. How about that? And he goes, why would you do that? She says, because I know you're a good person. But a lot of people don't realize it because you always trying to prove you're something not. And he says, why, you'd trust me? And she said, so he totally had a meltdown. She said he spent 10 minutes just bawling his eyes out and hiccuping and hugging me, she said. And she said it made a difference. I said, well, that's a neat story. That's a neat story. So you still haven't explained why you just came across the library crying and hugging me. She goes, well, because that happened 5 minutes ago.
Are you kidding me?
I said, okay. And I hugged her back. I said, it's going to be a hugging day. But
oh, wow.
It's just neat stuff. Yeah.
I've read the book probably 18 times to different sets of kids, and I've had similar experiences. Not they hadn't been quite to that point yet where they were going to be sent somewhere else, because I was at the middle school level. But some of the kids, they first start out and they're kind of hard and scoffing at the book a little bit and like, this is lame and la 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 la, and as we get into it, you can see them starting to soften around the edges and sort of engaging in the actual discussions, because we like to talk about what's going on and how's this impacting so and so in the book and so in the book. And then at the end we just do a real have them actually write their reaction to the book, with some leading questions. And some of those, I always like called them fringe kids because they're just, right on the edge there. And it's one of the things I liked about teaching middle school. They're still malleable. They haven't decided yet that it's too late for me, kind of thing. And they put together some really beautiful responses, and you can see how it changed their lives. So that book is changing people's lives, and the story with the compassion and between the two main characters, and then the other two main characters, the adult characters as well, how they're impacting Cole's life through their compassionate acts, and the lessons that they're teaching them in very subtle and very powerful ways. And I think we as adults need to keep doing that for our youth. They need that direction, and what's really neat is to provide it in a story like what you presented with Touching Spirit Fair. It's just been phenomenal.
Yeah. And the whole process of circle justice, restorative justice, it is so powerful. The recidivism of traditional justice is about 90%. 90% of the people that get sent away to jail end up back in jail. So you're not stopping the process. But with circle justice, it's somewhere between 20 and 30% recidivism. So huge difference in success levels of people that do or don't return to the penal system. In Montana, I was involved in circle justice to some degree. And there was one young boy that we held a circle for, and he'd broken into a car dealership and just took a baseball bat and smashed everything in the display rooms and cars and everything else. And he was 15 years old, just at a point where he was going to be sent away with an adult, prison record and be sent to an adult prison. And them knowing that if he ever went to an adult prison, that'd be the end of his life. That'd be the end of his life. He'd become hardened and a chip on his shoulder, and 90% chance he'd come back and go back into jail again. And so a friend of mine who's a lawyer down there that works with Youth Imperative, he got the young boy lined up for circle justice. And with circle, those of you that may not know this, it carries a big stick, but it carries a big carrot. And if the young boy would subscribe to the carrot, then he stood a chance of not having the stick used. But if he didn't, if he thought this was all a joke, then he'd end up back in an adult prison. But he had one chance to with youth restorative justice. And so what they did was they went to the car dealership and they said, listen, instead of, you'll not get any restoration for what the damage he's done unless you sign up for this. And if you sign up for this, you'll get 2,000 hours of his time working there. And if he screws up even once, then he's out the door and he's off to adult prison. And so they reluctantly agreed to this. And what happened was nothing short of a miracle. The boy realized very quickly that first desk inside the door, that after he'd broken the windows and come in and smashed that window, that picture of that old man on the wall, that was the secretary's husband that had died of cancer. And that was his last picture, and he had wrecked it. And then he realized that the desk beyond that he'd smashed and broken all those trinkets that were on the top, those were little clay things those are the very first things that her first grade boy or kindergarten boy had made at school and brought home to mommy. Now those were gone. And the next desk, and he started realizing that this wasn't some corporate entity that he'd attacked. This was real people, real lives and he'd hurt. And over the course of his time there, he went to every single employee that his actions affected and in tears apologized and did everything he could to try to make up for them for what he had done wrong. At the end of his 2,000 hours, he had become one of the best employees at that car dealership. And they he said, I wished I didn't have to leave. And they said, well, why do you have to? And he says, well, because you don't want me here. And they said, yeah, we do. And they hired him. And if you can go to that car dealership today, he's one of the best car salesmen in Montana, you know. But that's what restorative justice is all about. It's all about healing. It's not about punishment. Punishment has just never, ever been the ideal solution.
That's awesome. I think we have about 5 minutes left, Ben. And before we go, I just want to do a couple things, a little plug for the Charter. This webinar is brought to you by the Charter for Compassion, charterforcompassion.org. Please join us there and check out the different webinars that are coming up. Ben, I want you to tell us, if you can, I don't know how much you can share or not share, but we know that Touching Spirit Fair is being made into a motion picture, word out on the street anyways. And what can you share with us that's okay to share with us about that?
There's really not, the screenplay has been completed. The development process is arduous. It's unbelievable. And so I've learned, I have one of my other novels called Petey that's further along in its development for the big screen, and it's been 5 years in the works. Some of the biggest movies out there are in development for 7 or 8 years, and then they go to production in 9 months. And so Touching Spirit Bear has been in development now for about 2 years. So it still has a ways to go, but it's with some very, very good people and with some good vision. So just keep your fingers crossed. Once you sell the rights to a movie, to a book like that for screen rights, they own it. It's not like a translation right where they have to stay true to the words and the spirit of the book. They own it, and it makes you a little nervous, but I like the director's heart and where he's at with it. So keep your fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll all be going. And I haven't bought popcorn yet, though.
It's so funny because I was like, oh, they have to put that in the movie. They have to put that in the movie, like just little parts, because it's such a, for me as the reader, there are certain things that were so integral to the story, and it may not be true for everyone else, but for me it is, so it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together. Ben, I want to thank you so much for spending your time and energy with us today. You're such a treat to spend time with, and thank you for sharing all the cool stories as always. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are listening, if you enjoyed this webinar, we have tons more that are coming up, and we would appreciate your donations to keep these things coming. You can go to charterforcompassion.org to do that. We would, again, love you to join us and sign the charter. So thank you. And Ben, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate letting me come into your homes, living rooms, and hearts. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Happy Earth Week month.
Bye now.